kina semdol ka ke mofa seda.
Good morning. Welcome to Talking in Stations, a show about EVE Online, a spaceship game. If you're watching us live on Twitch TV, we have a podcast version on talkinginstations.com or wherever you get your podcasts. We also have a YouTube hub with videos on demand at youtube.com/talkinginstations, all one word. Today we have Invasion episode 49 titled Winter in Tribute. Join us to hear why. I'm your host, Carneros, and I'm joined by my co-host and two guests today, and we'll let them introduce themselves here. Go.
Hi, I'm Elise. Glad to be here. Sorry I missed last week. It was a great show. I was able to catch parts of it live, and then I just listened to the podcast afterwards. But we've got a little bit of a fun continuation going on here.
Nice.
Hi, I'm Dave Zeta. I'm a director in Rote Kapelle, sometimes FC and Diplo as well.
Nice.
And I'm Murray Rothbardo. I'm one of the main FCs for Unspoken Alliance, which is an alliance currently situated in Tribute.
Nice. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Excellent. As usual, we're going to actually start off with our news segment and then come back and talk about our main topics in a few minutes here. On the news section, as you know, we're just finishing up EVE London, which is the last leg of the Invasion World Series tour, where they went around and did little mini fan fests in various cities of the world. And there were a number of things that were talked about in that.
Yeah, it was very much like it was a real hype. Like, I know it was one of the smaller events that they had, barring the the fan fest at home where they're just in some guy's house. But there was a lot of like big information in this thing.
My guys that went to it said it did not feel small at all. It felt like a big crowded room and a good sized crowd and good energy. They said it felt bigger than they expected. But let's go over some of the news that they said there. First of all, mentioned before, but also covered again at EVE London, Invasion Chapter 2 arrives on Tuesday. That's Tuesday, November 26th. From the time we're recording this, that's not very far. And that brings us the shared bookmarks, the Zernitra Triglavian Dreadnought with the new ammo, the Mimesis implant set that enhances the peak damage of your Triglavianness at the cost of a slower ramp up. There's the new Firestorm skins that are coming for your ships. There's the new Triglavian combat experience that we don't know too much about yet. Or do you, Elise? The one where you have to make a big choice?
Yeah, from what I understand, you get to choose between when you're doing the high sec invasions, you get to choose, are you going to work against the drifters or are you going to work against the empires, which is kind of a big thing. I know a lot of groups on TQ are already like adopting or have already adopted like the Triglavian meme. So they all have the Triglavian outfits on, going Clade, obviously. I know Asherothi was like super hype about this when he heard at eVegas. And he was like, yeah, I'm gonna work with the Triglavians, of course. And the Amar role players like, oh no, of course you don't work with the Triglavians. That would be heresy. No. So it's created a lot of ripples in not only the RP community, but like the people that do all the Triglavian invasion stuff, which is about to get a lot more profitable, I believe, because of this. The demand for this dreadnought is going to be pretty massive, I'd say.
Do we know anything yet about how they're going to distribute it?
From what I heard at from like little snippets of people talking at roundtables and stuff like that, it's going to be part of like the high. It's not going to be something that you find solely in the abyssal sites. It's going to be in the group sites, the group invasions.
All right, so no BPOs. You have to go get BPC drops.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Grumble. Okay. And then, but some more information came out at Eve London. So let's look at some of that. The hang on. The rapid fire part, is that the same day? The Team Talos rapid fire. Is that November 26th or is that December 10th?
I think that's coming in.
Peeking Over Castles is December 10th. So this is
the rapid fire might be coming a little bit early because I got it in an email actually.
Yeah.
CCP like sends me not an email. Sorry,
yeah,
I can't. But yeah, they sent me this email on one of like my alts that I never used, so I didn't really recognize it. They're like, "Oh, hey, look what we're doing all this stuff to Minmatar guns and projectiles and just Minmatar ships. Enjoy." So I was like, "Oh shit." I know a lot of people are going to be really happy about this. At Vegas, we thought it might have just been a Mutant nerf because the Mutant is an overwhelmingly powerful ship right now. So they're going to tweak it down a little bit, and we thought that could be like where it ended, but no, not at all.
But this little thing, rapid fire, includes buffs to medium auto. It includes buffs to the damage bonuses on the Stabber Fleet issue and the Tempest Fleet issue. It includes buffs to explosion velocity on the Typhoon and the Bellicose. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think the Typhoon, is too cool a ship and has needed a little while. Anyway,
it has definitely needed some love. I think right now the only people who are flying Typhoons are a Minmatar role player group headed by Deep Spar. I think they're the only ones that fly the Typhoon, and now maybe more people will give it its due. It'll have a little bit better projection, a little bit better application. You can do rapid heavies with it and be a little bit more nimble, and shoot some of the smaller ships without having to worry about battleships like this, which is what Typhoons are kind of used for now.
Though with the warp speed changes, I think it's taken a while, but the meta may adjust to some of the more interesting battleship doctrines, and you can do interesting stuff with the Foon between rapid hit.
Yeah, absolutely. And now that like the boost meta is kind of moving away, at least for medium gangs and up, it might be true that a rapid heavy Typhoon could be could have a
hope springs eternal. But actually, the big part of that update would not be any of those buffs. It would be the nerf to mutants. What do we know or could guess about the incoming nerf to mutants?
So the mutants are like this weird ship that make projectiles look good, right? So the projectiles themselves aren't that great. Autocannons are kind of hot garbage right now because of the way that they were initially designed to work based on. So the idea for medium projectiles is that you get to just do all your damage and fall off. So you could use your speed superiority as a Minmatar ship to do damage and fall off and kite in and out between optimal and fall off. But that play doesn't really exist too much, which means that the medium projectiles just kind of suck because you're always shooting and fall off, and so you're always doing less damage than you think you're doing. The Mutant doesn't have that issue at all because all it does is it tries to fly around. It's a pretty tanky ship itself, and it uses howitzers, the 720s, so it just alphas through targets without having to worry about reps or anything like that. And you can even get 2 shots off because the way it works. And then you have the ADC to really boost up your tank so you don't lose critical mass nearly fast enough. So what I imagine they're going to do is probably going to lower the power grid a little bit to make it. You have to make new choices.
Just keep going. Ignore that.
And so you're going to have to do new choices based on what you're going to do. So you can't necessarily fit the tank, the damage mods, the ADC, and the guns. You're going to have to choose, hey, do I lower my tank down a little bit to do this firepower? Or do I get rid of some gyros? So I think that's the direction they're going to do. Like the little small things. We're not talking about making the ship worthless or making you have to fit like 650s or something like that. So
I don't know. I mean, I've seen CCP nerfs for stuff that's dominant before. I wouldn't be surprised if the projection gets pulled back a little bit because, I mean, part of the advantage is they're so fast and, project so far, while still getting that really nice alpha that, I don't know, maybe a nerf to projection.
Yeah, I mean, depending on what stats they go for, if they do actually go after the speed, that'll probably change a lot because it'll let people actually maneuver around grid and other things. If they want to use T3Cs or Eagles or other things that can kind of keep up, then things might get interesting. But if they just poke a little bit at like the fall off or something, you'll still see a big pile of mutants because losing 10, 20 kilometers worth of range isn't going to matter when you can just boat over at 2,400 meters a second and just shoot them in their face.
Nice. Now these things are coming next Tuesday, but something else is coming in a very Rapidfire, I don't know exactly when it is, but it could be as early as Tuesday. The Invasion Chapter 2 is Tuesday. There's another thing coming starting, I think it's Wednesday, and that is a sort of a Black Friday skill points and boosters giveaway that's going to run November 27th to December 4th. One of those log in all of your accounts type things and you get prizes for Alpha and Omega. Just warning you so you don't miss out on that. But there's also stuff coming December 10th. Let's talk about that. Let's see. Kicking Over Castles is the next Talos release. It's funny how we have now Eve releases and Talos releases. It cracks me up. I kind of like it, actually. But the Team Talos group, Kicking Over Castles, means they're going to take away the option to set day of the week on your defensive settings for your upwell structures. That means you still get to pick what time it comes out of reinforcement, but it does mean that you can't pick what day. So people who think, oh, I want to hit your stuff, I want a nice timer on the weekend, can at least plan ahead and come by and make timers towards the end of the week to get you set up for the weekend.
yeah, that was a really good mechanic that Pauses had, which is the thing right before well structures, is that you could say, hey, I want to create like a deluge of timers for you guys, and I want them to be when I want them, not when you want them to be. So you can strategically do two timers that come out in the same system or in different systems at the same exact time. So you have to choose between them. I know a lot of people have been kind of clamoring for a mechanic like that. They also liked the aspect of player-owned star bases where you could, kite the timer if you had control of the grid. So, if you stayed on the grid for like 12 hours, you could set the timer to be directly into your time zone if you wanted to be. But it required like a massive upfront cost. So this is going to be a neat thing, a neat iteration on it. Hopefully, it's not something that they just say, "Oh, that's it, we fixed it, job done, Citadels are fine."
Yeah,
But it's a move in the right direction, right?
Yeah. Structure and defender bonuses have been like on the defense, the bonuses have been way too strong for way too long, and hopefully this is the start of moving that back in the other direction.
CCP Rise also tweeted something a little bit cryptic. He said, on Kicking Castles, we're close to a low power solution as well, but decided to hold off a bit longer for something slightly more elegant. More on it soon. So that does imply like they know that the low power issue is a thing. And CCP Rise did mention in his presentation at eVegas, which was probably the best EVE Online presentation I've ever seen. You should go watch it. He did mention that like, hey, there are some technical limitations to why we can't do cool stuff when a Citadel goes into low power. So this shows that they're still working on it. They've got a plan that's more elegant and less like slapped together. So that should be good. So low power Citadel should be less useful in the future.
Nice. Another change coming in this patch is no upwell structures, no medium upwell structures can be anchored in hostile space if the ADM, the activity defense modifier, is above 4. Let's explain this and break it down for the new folks for a bit. If you have sovereignty in nullsec and you've been living in your space and raising its activity defense modifier through mining and ratting and whatever, I think those are the only 2 that count. Once it gets to 4, hostiles can still come in and online a structure in your space, but they have to use a more expensive structure and get more skin in the game. They can't do an Astrahus or a Tatara, not Tatara. Astrahus, Raitaru, or Athenor, the 3 cheapest medium-sized structures.
And those things cost the same as like 2 or 3 battleship hulls. So they're really, really cheap to get in on. And, who cares what happens to them? You throw them down and see what happens.
On the other hand, if you live in a region that has NPC space, computer-controlled space in the middle of it, there are no ADMs in that. You don't actually hold sovereignty there. So Delve or Fountain, it wouldn't matter because you got space you could put anything in. But for a place that doesn't have any NPC space nearby, like maybe Malpace, this is kind of a nice little buff.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I think this is actually, for smaller groups, a much bigger deal because previously it was very, very difficult, unless you had total time zone coverage, to stop smaller structures. I mean, you don't even get a notification if you hold sovereignty on upwell structure anchoring. You do for pauses, but not for upwell.
It's that.
Exactly. So now it's going to be much easier for smaller groups to keep smaller harassing structures to be anchored. But at the same time, I know, we and some other groups we've been involved with have, thrown down medium structures against much larger groups in their important systems and have used that to generate content. So a little bit, one way, a little bit the other in terms of that balance.
I will miss Cone or Federation of Conifers informing us that they've warped yet another Darkness Super off of their staging Keepstar.
Rest in peace.
Now, how does warping them off their Keepstar affected by this ADM upwell, medium upwell structure thing?
Yeah, so I can explain that a little bit. So Cone wasn't the only group that did this. A couple other groups did this as well. And it works really well against big opponents that are in different time zones. So what they would do is they would go and anchor a medium structure directly in line with the undock from an enemy staging Keepstar. And so the enemy couldn't really kill this structure because it wasn't in their main time zone. And so what they would do is they would have someone just sit by the structure, and anytime a super undocked, they try and invite them to fleet. If they accepted, they would fleet warp them off of the Keepstar onto the Astrahus generally. And from there, you have the anti-cap weapons from the structure, plus it's bubbled on an enemy structure, and it's very easy to kill that super or capital or whatever it is.
Couldn't you do the same thing without a medium structure behind you?
You could, but generally speaking, most of those capitals, if you look at either what Test was doing in Deterid or what Cone was doing up in Declan, most of the damage was coming from the structure because it was a lot easier to just have someone gunning the structure with anti-cap weapons than it was to try and both just hold an enemy super bubbled in kind of dead space where they can just start warping the blob over and saving it. It's very easy to keep something bubbled when your dictors can start in tether.
They'll just have to sell some of that super loot and invest in some Fortizars so they can do the fleet warping to a fort.
Just to give you some context, a anti-capital fit, even just an Astra house, does easily a dread and a half worth of damage and is indestructible for all intents and purposes, in the scale of that kind of engagement. So having that on field is a huge force multiplier, in addition to all the E-war it can bring. So it makes it a lot easier and makes it much harder for them to counter drop caps or even faxes to get in there and save their super.
Roger. Okay, and there was a third thing that I'm going to need a little help with on this Kicking Over Castles patch, December 10th. and that is the restrictions on tethering in a faction warfare system. Can someone explain that? Is it everyone can't tether, or is it just that if you're not on the winning side in control? How does this work?
That's a good question, actually. I just saw that they made a faction warfare change. I was like, oh, sweet, nice, good job, faction warfare guys got something. I know Brisk mentioned that it was a good start, but not enough from the people that he was talking to.
I know it has something to do with free port upwell structures set up in faction warfare systems so that anyone can tether on it. And it was some unfair advantage. I don't know.
The way it works right now is if you are in faction warfare, let's say you're in a Mar faction warfare, and the Minmatar win that system, then you can no longer dock in that system if you're a Mar. The way people got around that, obviously that's a huge implications, not being able to dock to get your things, not being able to run missions, et cetera, et cetera. The way people got around this is just by dropping upwell structures. So yeah, the Minmatar lost the system, but who cares? You're not based out of the station there, so you don't need to worry about docking. You just can go into the this upwell structure here and there, and then blah blah blah. You're good to go. So what I imagine they've done is they've extended the docking thing to upwell structures that are in the war zone as well. So maybe if you've got a Mar.
And brought it into the state that it is today. Not having battle lines, not having the ability to control particular systems and who can realistically be there and dock there, did so much to hurt fact warfare, so much to remove the battle lines that tended to concentrate players and create meaningful objectives for them to fight over. When I saw Citadels come out and that they were going to be in fact warfare without limitations like that, I could not believe that CCP just was going to assassinate a whole play style like that.
Yeah, and CCP Rise did mention that, like, hey, this is something we're aware of. We know that faction warfare is a big thing, especially for newer people, especially getting into PvP. But it's just they always said, oh, we'll do a bigger, more comprehensive update next, and then it always got pushed back and pushed back and pushed back.
Yes.
So yeah, it looks like it's restricting tethering for hostiles on citadels in Lowsec in faction warfare zones, not docking, just tethering. So.
Okay. All right. And you don't know anything about a free market release, do you?
I do not. No. Like I said, I was as they were going through the things, they had Hypernet Relay as one of their like coming soon, and I had no idea what that meant. And then I was like, oh, maybe I just missed something. But luckily, no one else had any idea what it meant either, so I'm not the only one. It's one of their like little surprise releases that is coming soon.
Well, they also mentioned that there is a surprise coming 2 days later, get this, on December 12th, that it's also coming from Team Talos, and they wouldn't tell us what it was. Which, I'm like, their release cadence is very unusual right now, unpredictable. And then there was one more big thing. And this was actually a policy change, and it's effective immediately, as far as I know.
I think it happens next month. It goes into effect next month, from what I understand.
Okay, so as of next month, which is not very far from now, we have a huge policy change that CCP employees can now play EVE Online with a lot more freedom than before. So we should give some context of the before. I used to be a CCP employee years ago, and what they briefed me on, first of all, it started with, do you have any characters in the game now? Give us a list of all of them. Yes, okay, and I gave them the list of all my characters. Okay, and they banned them all. And they said, we're going to take these away from you for 6 months. After 6 months, we'll unlock them unless they're famous or super powerful or rich or something. But none of your guys are, so we're just gonna, we'll give them back to you in 6 months. We do this not because we don't want you to play the game, but for two reasons. We want you to have your stronger emotional ties and loyalty be to the company, not to your characters in the game or your corp. And two is because we want you to start again with the new player experience and get again the feeling of what new players must go through when they play the game, because we want you to be thinking about that as you work here. So that was the first thing. Second thing they said was, okay, here are some, make some accounts, give it to us, and we'll mark them as free play, so you don't have to pay to play, and we'll give you 4 accounts. I think it might be 5 today or something, but it was 4 accounts when I worked there. And they said you can't do anything griefing related. So no scamming, no camping someone and killing them over and over again, no cheating or lying or something like that, no espionage gameplay, no nothing, no Jita scams, don't steal from your corp, don't steal from another player, don't trick them, don't do anything like that. Nothing that would make a new player want to quit the game. And then they said, don't no positions of authority, and don't amass too much of something that would affect the marketplace. A couple things like that. And I had a guy that was working for me who had an amazing collection of Plex. He was one of the top 10 owners of Plex in the game at the time he joined CCP, and they never gave him back his character until he left the company. But yeah, no, his it couldn't unlock. He was brilliant at that stuff. Brilliant. He gave me, whenever I needed a market expert advice on things, I would turn to him, and he knew it all great. Anyway, so now they're making a change. And this new change is you can, and also if anyone found out you were a dev, you had to go immediately to the security team and tell them, and they would look at a case-by-case basis. In my case, I had a little corp of people that I was playing EVE with, that I had been playing World of Warcraft with years before, and we'd known each other for so many years. There was no way to disguise my voice, and they were nobodies. So the security team just said, yeah, go ahead, play with those. Those guys won't make any difference. Tell them not to say anything. And a 10-man friends and family know each other corp is not meaningful. But if anyone finds out in Imperium or something, in those days CFC, yeah, no, we're going to take your account away from you. Okay. So you'll have to start again. So now they're saying you can play more or less openly. You don't have to destroy your character if they figure it out. If they see your Icelandic IP address, it's okay. But you can't help your corp with any of your abilities or any of your knowledge. You can't. You can't grief. You can't do any of the mean stuff still. What else did they say?
No leadership positions, so you can't be like running an alliance.
It's not that fun.
Or anything like that. Yeah, exactly. But this is like I'd say it's probably the biggest like institutional change that CCP has adopted, and this is something that it's people have been asking for it for a long time, both within the company and without. CSM 6 and 7, I can say with certainty, had this as one of their priorities to let the people play. But for whatever reason, it just couldn't get off the ground. Still, people they were worried, and at the time it was like the Incarnate era, so people weren't exactly high on CCP at the time. So why do you want to submit your devs to getting ridiculed over and over when it wasn't really their fault? I guess that was the idea. But now the dam is finally broke. So CCPers can play at every level. The reason that they couldn't really play at the high levels before, which includes like capital and super capital stuff and stuff, well, basically high end PvP and world building, is because like obviously the Eve players are really worried about spies. So when you go through the spy checks and everything, when they put you in seat, they'll be like, "Hey, this is an Icelandic IP. You don't sound Icelandic. There's like 100 Icelandic Eve players. Are you a CCP?" And then they'd have to like restart, right? So it'd be done. So functionally, they couldn't play in Nullsec Alliances, and now that's finally over. So you'll be able to see it. Obviously, one other stipulation: it's optional, so it's not mandatory. Some CCPers, well, I'm sure, want to stay private. Um, some will come out and say, "Hey, I'm here. I'm joining Test," or "Hey, I'm here. I'm joining Goons." "Hey, I'm here. I'm in Volta."
Well,
But
when I at one point in my dev career, I played more or less openly like that, and that was Age of Conan. Unfortunately, it was a horrible idea because within about 2 months, every time I logged into the game to play, I would get all these messages saying, "My friend got banned. Can you help unlock him?" And I can't log into my account, and I was doing something and all my gold disappeared, or and it would be customer service, or it would be suggestions or complaints about the game the whole time. And I couldn't even play the game anymore and have fun. It felt like I was going to work when I logged in. So, if you guys meet a dev in game, please try to, focus on the person playing the game because, strategically we need that. Anyway.
yeah, just don't be a dick. That's basically it. If you're a dick, they're gonna go back into being in hiding, right? Because they're not forced to out themselves at all, and it will definitely better the game, right? So, I remember on one of the earlier CSMs, uh, we were talking about dread fights, and at the time, the game was super buggy, and I don't think a lot of alliances knew this, but when it got into a high lag situation where there are a lot of people on grid, the only way that your dread guns would cycle is if you clicked on the icon, like not on your HUD or anything, but underneath the target. That's how you get the dread gun to finally turn off. Otherwise, you get stuck on forever and ever and ever. And CCP didn't know this because, like, how could you if you don't do that? So because it didn't work with that way for turrets, it was explicitly for dread guns. So we brought in a video, and in the next patch, it was fixed, like just like that. So it's amazing the things that these guys, if they stumble on, that they'll just naturally fix. So uh, I'm really looking forward to that. This is a huge positive change. Uh, Hopefully people will take it in stride and not be total dicks.
One edge case I'm a little bit concerned about is they say they don't want them to have positions of authority. But if I get one in the Bastion, I I would be sorely tempted to put an alt in the asset holding corporation and give them director roles so they can see the interface that I have to deal with to manage, my space empire. Because it's not, I know how when the dev is sitting at his desk writing that functionality and then quickly testing it, he's not putting in hundreds of structures and thousands of players in the list. They're not testing it at the kind of scale we live with. So I'd love for them to see that.
Maybe we'll iterate on it and we'll be able to let them hit the corp interface that takes like 4 years to load.
All right. Do any of our guests have any thoughts about about the Eve London news?
Well, I mean, the CCP playing again is huge. It's hard to be passionate about a game if you can't play. There does obviously always need to be a balance between being really involved in a game personally, having personal stakes, and knowing what the day-to-day experience is, and being able to like look back at it from a high level 30,000 foot perspective in terms of game design, but not having them involved in the game itself, I think has been a detriment. And I think especially Elise said some of the interface stuff, I'm sure now that they're working on that and dealing with it personally, trying to get stuff done, sometimes quickly under stress, they'll maybe smooth out some of those rough edges. Though that has come a long way over the last couple of years. So
Yeah. Most of the changes I've seen have been overwhelmingly kind of on the good side of things. One very interesting thing to watch with the rapid fire update and medium autocannons is that for a long time, medium autocannons were so bad that many ships just refused to use them. The only ships that did use them were the Cinnable and the Sleipnir for the most part, because they had very, very strong bonuses. So if medium autocannons do get tuned to the point where the average autocannon ship can actually use them pretty effectively, you might see some eventual retuning of the Cinnable or Sleipnir or additional iterations on ships, just because those ships are the only ones where they currently work, so they might become way too strong with them if medium autocannons are buffed to a pretty reasonable level.
Yeah, my hot take is that vagabonds are going to become impressively popular in the next 2 months. I think people are going to look at the Vaga and be like, "Hey, this ship's actually good. Shit, let's go for it." Um,
yeah, we've been thinking about the Vaga a lot, but until we know the changes, man, if they get a little bit more projection or maybe some more tracking, I don't know, they're going to be spicy. But you know what? Cinnaballs, man, especially after the warp speed changes, Cinnaballs, if ACs are better, holy crap, like for small gang.
Yeah, Cinnables are going to be ridiculously good if they can project out to 30, 35, 40 with autocannons.
and this is something that the CCP will be able to experience firsthand, right? So they'll get swarmed by Cinnaballs, and maybe nerf the nerf cycle will happen in months and not years.
Nice. All right, let's move on to some other in-game news from the player side for a moment. In the system of Marto, there was a big brawl. Maestro, can we trouble you for the battle report slide on that? Do you know anything about that? Who knows about this? Pen is out, Gal Mill alliances versus Templus Calcif, Wrecking Crew, and Federation Uprising over 2 Templus Calcif structures in the Black region, or Black Rise.
I'm trying to remember the system that it's over, but it's kind of like a continuation, thematic continuation from what happened 2 weeks ago in Heck, right? So in Heck, which is obviously high sec, not low sec, but a bunch of people came together and clashed over some structures from war targets, and like over 100 billion damages was done. And so the FW guys were like, "Hey, you know what? We can have fun too." And so they've been reinforcing. There's been like some back and forth reinforcing going on over structures, and I guess it just all came to a head.
I'm very excited for Lowsec Brawls like this in the future. If anybody doesn't know, Snuffed Out, very large player in that area, recently disbanded, and that opens up a lot of space for smaller scale engagements that I guess scale up to be pretty big engagements to start and grow in conflict without worrying about the boogeyman coming and interjecting themselves for content. So I think we're going to see a lot of action in this space.
Yeah, that's a really valid point, right? So now that Snuff, which was like the oppressive low sec guy, isn't there to stop fights, or at least act as the saber rattling, right? Because a lot of the low sec meta, especially in that area of space, was hey, whoever bat phone Snuff first wins, or if Snuff sees you, you can't really use capitals because they'll just come and kill the capitals. Who cares what side they're on? But now that Snuff are kind of no more and spread to the 4 corners of the universe, it opens up some space. There's this huge power vacuum for groups like these guys to come in and throw their might around without having to worry about the big dogs coming in and stomping whatever happens.
Yeah, and it is always sad to see old storied group like that. The guys like Tao and High are obviously incredible content creators over the years. However much gur and blurf there may be outside of it, but definitely a forest fire like this allows new stuff to grow. So
The battle report might be a little off in terms of who was on what side, but it's 93 billion ISK lost compared to 35 billion ISK lost. That's a big fight. And then next, also nullsec related, and possibly also Snuff Box related. Dirt and Glitter is telling us they're disbanding. Elise.
Yeah, Dirt and Glitter, they've been one of my favorite little groups to fly around with, or at least bump into. They've been predominantly through their lives. They've been Amar FW Corp, and they've been kind of like a big leader in the MRFW scene. They'd lead fleets like daily and weekly fleets that everyone in the war zone was invited to. They joined Tappy for a little while. They joined Black Legion for a little while. But eventually they settled back down into their humble homes in Amar Lowsec, where I think they lived in Huola, and they just had fun. They were just a group of dudes that liked Kesha instead of Taylor Swift. So obviously we're at odds a little bit. But they like to have fun, and they announced yesterday evening / this morning that there's no one that wants to take over the corp, so they're just shutting it down. And I know that a lot of the people on Reddit that don't really know Dirt and Glitter at all, they're like, "Oh, why would you just shut down the corp? Just give it to someone else. There's so much history." And people in the corp, they weren't up to it. They didn't want it to go. They said, "Hey, I'd rather it go out on our own terms, and we can join friends in other groups, and let DNG die for now." But they were a really fun-loving group that did all sorts of things, and it'll be sad that their little banner is no longer flying in space.
All right, another player news item this week. A very rare ship died in a Class 2 wormhole. Actually, same Class 2 wormhole where we lost the Whiptail. We lost a Virtuoso class stealth bomber. So this is an Alliance tournament prize ship. Can we, Maestro, can you put the Z Killboard link up for us? Thank you. Brilliant. It's like magic. So what do we know about this? I'm told he died to the famous Black Ops hunter Frederick von Hole and the famed Russian PvP streamer Lucy Liu.
Well,
Yeah,
if
that's
if you
it. Basically.
if you fly an AT ship these days and you want to keep it for very long, you got to research Mr. Frederick and Lucy and keep appraised of what they're up to and how they operate. I mean, Faith's a very good pilot, and just I sometimes maybe anybody else have nightmares about being in some incredibly expensive asset and accidentally like hitting undock and coming back to your computer just to make sure you're still in station. I have that sometimes.
Every time I die in an expensive ship like that, I tab over just when I noticed that I forgot to hit dock, or as I like to say, the game forgot I hit dock, because I obviously don't make mistakes, right?
Yeah, just to
So
explain it a little better. So the story is that he had been hunting, exploring wormhole chains on another character, and somehow it accidentally just hit undock on his virtuoso, and I think it was on a keep star too. So it must have taken forever to boat out of undock. And I guess he was just unlucky enough to have the wrong hunters in his hole at the wrong time, and there you go. Those ships the AT frigates can be very powerful, but not when they're just sitting there and not when a couple of Lokis are shooting at it. So,
yeah, and as you mentioned, Faith Evan God is a super good pilot. So he's probably kicking himself a little bit right now. But there are some funny similarities, as Carneros was mentioning. One of the last AT ships to die in a wormhole was also in this same wormhole. Like that.
cursed.
Yeah, you guys. Yeah.
It's
All
kind of
right.
funny. I'd actually been flying around in Imp earlier this month, and the bomber that was used on that kill, we weren't sure who it was, and I'm like, man, was that Lucy making a pass at me? And seeing it here, it's like, oh, you just feel the chill.
Yeah, so there's quite a big group of people that hunt these AT ships, and I know when Rocket X was doing it actively, the amount of efforts and work that went into just trying to nab one is absolutely absurd, just completely nuts in terms of effort put down. So I can only imagine these guys stumbled upon this guy slowboating out, and the thought is you got to be like, is this bait? And you see the ships they took. They basically just volleyed it. Like 2 of the dudes volleyed it. They didn't even need the third guy to hit. So even if it was bait, they weren't baiting. They weren't giving up too much.
Another news item. We talked about it a little bit last week during the show, because in the second half of this show live, we had a guest, Killa B, from NC Northern Coalition Dot, who said, "Oh look, the initiative is deploying, and oh look, we can see where they're going," and they ended up going to Branch, to the station of 5 TAC P1Y2. So if you never go to nullsec and you have all, just go fit yourself an interceptor, put a cloak on it, fly out there, and go see what's happening in the world. You too can do this. By the way, just make sure you can make sure your fit is maneuverable and you can get through a gate camp. But yeah, go out and check it out. That's a pretty strategic location I'm seeing, isn't it, Elise?
Yeah, it's pretty nice. You can get to Venal if you wanted to pretty quickly. You can get to Tino, which is obviously, I think, where they're going to be spending a lot of their time. And if you need some backup coming in, Declan's not too far away. So it's a really nice little area. It gives you quite a bit of areas in Branch and Tino to get into. They're living in initiative will be basing out of Rager Regiment space. So don't expect those Fortizars to be easy to nab down. Ranger regiments are Chinese time zone based, so it'll be even with everything, it'll be pretty difficult to knock it down, especially with the people involved. So yeah, there's been a lot of hubbub about this move and what the implications are. And the implications, they could be huge, right? It could be that this is the spearhead of the next big war that's going to head out between the Imperium and PanFam. Theoretically, you could have like this being the tip, fighting over this area and pushing PanFam back into drones, and you can have Legacy coming up from the south, pushing people up and cornering PanFam into the corner there. But I think more likely it's just initiative taking advantage of the situation, saying, hey, these guys in Declan are getting kind of beat up now. They're getting outnumbered by more and more people moving to the area. They're making timers for us. And if Sword Dragon and his boys are happy being, I don't want to say meat shields because that has a negative connotation, but if they want to be the big muscle and we can just do whatever we want on timers, then that sounds like a lot of fun. And honestly, in EVE Online, that's probably the most fun you can have in a position of war, is being the guy that doesn't have to make timers, the guy that doesn't have to show up to everything. But when there's a big fight going down, you can be the one that turns this tide of battle. So I think that's probably what the initiative will be doing. They'll also have a lot of fun roaming around in those areas, running into PL and NC dot fleets and Horde fleets. A lot of movement in the venal area right now. There's a lot of groups are settling in the venal, similar to how they did in Tribute not too long ago. So it should be pretty interesting. And obviously, Branch isn't that far from Tribute. So if they want to go and mess down with Kapelle and you guys, that might be on the table.
Oh my God! Please come down, free us from the burdens of Sov ownership. We need more people to shoot at.
If the initiative moves a fleet over to Tribute, give us some context on Tribute. Who are they likely to shoot or not shoot? Or do they don't have any friends who live there, so they're likely to shoot anyone, right? Whoever has an interesting looking ship.
I mean, yeah. Initiative leans towards EUTZ, although we fought their USTZ a few times when Snuffed would ask them to come help. If they're in EU, they're probably going to be fighting Trigger Happy, who's getting pretty big. They're on the western side. A A lot of it, though, really depends, and this goes for both Tribute and Vale. Most people or most groups in this area are pretty competent. They know what they can and can't fight. So you do need to be conscious of what kind of fleet you're bringing. If you show up with 45 Macarials and 15 Logi, even if you're toasting a staging eye hub, we're just going to stare at you and say, okay, have fun walking home, because that's not a fight that anybody can take. And so you're wasting everybody's time. But if you want to show up in a fleet that, similar numbers to ours, a similar comp where we can form something, even if we don't have as many people, and say, we have a good shot, you will get a fight.
Yeah, I mean,
Nice.
we're all pretty experienced groups down in Tribute, so I mean, we know what the score is at this point. We're not going to get farmed or do anything ridiculously stupid or feed. So, but we do like good hard fights. So bring those, but just don't bring dumb stuff.
So it
I think
makes a
we're
lot of sense for Initiative, who really like to be a mobile. They don't like to sit back and just farm, right? They like to go out and find fights, wherever that be, wherever those be located at. And the North right now seems to be the best spot between Vino, where a whole bunch of groups are moving to, Tino, where there's like some fights going on, and Tribute every once in a while. I mean, a Pando v Kendar mashup would be dope. Like that would be fun to watch.
yeah.
That he's talking about Pandorelica, one of the FCs, one of the main FCs for the initiative, versus Kendar, the main FC, and also the CEO or leader of Trigger Happy, a group. Now, can you compare the size of Trigger Happy with the size of the other tribute organizations?
So, in terms of actives, honestly, at this point, Trigger Happy is probably pushing about 3 to 4 times the size of either Unspoken or Rote individually. Especially if you include Hazardous Company, who are kind of a smaller alliance that's mostly formed out of Peak, Higher Than Everest, a corp from PL?
Yeah.
Question mark. If
Slash
you
Black
include them as
Legions.
well, then Trigger Happy's gotten quite big, especially since I believe they absorbed a fair number of people from Snuffed Out.
Yeah, they're getting to be quite a group to watch. They're obviously offset from us pretty significantly. They're mostly EU and we're mostly late US, so we don't interface that much. But they are getting some good numbers these days. I think it would be a good fight if they take it on the right.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
oh, and the other thing that I thought would be funny about the Pando, the Kendar, was a huge FC in the Imperium. He worked with, I'm sure he's crossed paths with Pando as Blues before, but he set out to do his own thing with his alliance Trigger Happy, and I'm hearing everything I hear about Kendar's group is that they just love to fly with him because he's a great leader. He's probably one of those. If he wasn't a household name before this, he should be a household name now. Obviously, being a strat up FC in the Imperium probably does make you a household name. But if you had forgotten about him, he's kind of one of those people you should look out for.
in the Imperium, he took a sort of sleeping older SIG called Space Violence, and he reawakened it and reinvigorated it and led it to a lot of great activity. And there were feeds and wipes and stuff too, but he did a lot of great stuff with it. It became sort of a useful and important tool in the Imperium toolbox. And then he chose to uh, end that and extract himself and go, on polite terms and everything, and go start his own thing, so he could have more freedom and be in charge and run things, kind of with some more independence than you get from being a SIG in the Imperium, which I understand. So that's how he became known. At one point in the past, he was in the Bastion, so I know him too. But let's talk about Snuff Box for a moment. How has the the dissolution of Snuff Box affected Tribute?
I think that people are probably a little more comfortable using capitals, although they're still incredibly rare in the vast majority of engagement. Because again, most groups are pretty competent, so trying to just chuck dreads around isn't a very good solution to most problems. We have fleet comps that can deal with those. But one thing that when they were pushing in a bit to try and get some fights in the area, they did have a tendency to bring a little bit more than any group could really deal with. They would bring a very heavy, like, Nightmare Fleet, for example, with fax support, and you knew that you couldn't drop dreads on that fax because it was snuffed. They would put a 40-man dread bomb on your 15, and that would be the end of it. So it became really hard to fight. So a lot of people chose not to fight it, and I think it kind of suppressed content a little bit, particularly in Vale, until Snuffed realized that they weren't getting any fights, and they kind of left and gave up.
Snuff mostly tends, or mostly did used to try to get content out of nullsec for the most part versus taking strategic objectives. So they would come through and realize that there was not a good right size fight for them and then kind of bail out. It's sort of interesting. So we had Snuff poking Vale for a while, and that kind of suppressed activity there. They shot at some FE and reverb structures. I can't remember which one specifically.
I believe it was the
So
staging fort in TVN.
yeah, so that happened, and then Snuff left, and obviously disbanded. But now, actually, we have some of more recently we had some stuff from PL and Black Legion coming in, and they're now making some poking. They're making some inroads into Tribute and trying to get some content out of us and Vale, and that is actually having similar kind of effect. So the Snuff specter of them has been removed, but there's always somebody new coming in. So
Yeah, it was kind of funny because the first time I believe PL showed, they basically kind of did a kind of snuff-esque maneuver of a single fax was on field and they put supers on it. At which point, most groups decided, okay, well, if you're just going to drop supers on us whenever we do, we're not going to fight you for a while. And so that kind of resets the timer of like, you have to come a couple times and prove that you're coming in subcaps or something engageable before people are going to say, all right, I'll actually try and take this fight.
I was very surprised by that. The FC for that, I believe, was Muck Barovian, and he's a good FC, and it felt bad to have them immediately go to the let's just drop a bunch of supers on it solution rather than actual fleet strategy. So I can talk about that more.
Muck is the number one killer all time, actually, for at least that's what was in CCP Larrikin's presentation. And yeah, he is a pretty great FC. So it is an interesting turn. I wasn't there, so I don't know what happened. But sometimes people they just strategically, if they think you're going to run, they're just going to say, "Hey, let me get as many kills as I can while you're running." So that might be it. But you do bring a pretty good point with like how to deal with the ebb and flow of that, right? So if they do that, then you just don't fight them, and then they have to mind-numbingly reinforce structures or mind-numbingly do other stuff until they can get to the point where they can take a fight again. So it's a pretty good way of dealing with the blob.
Yeah, I guess I can talk about that fight specifically. So it was a jump bridge that was reinforced. Actually, we had two that night, and PL came in Macarials, and we had Ravens with fax support, and they had a decent number of max, and it was just a good back and forth. But as soon as a fight started on an astrogrid and our, fax was there, even though the fight was still going pretty well, supers were brought in. We actually ended up winning both the objective and the IS war on that fight because our response to the supers coming in was just to undock a bunch of Hicks and just go bubble the crap out of them. So even though our faxes went down, they were forced to pull their fleet back way out of position to clear tackle on the supers, and we just you know took our toll on Max, and trading Max versus Ravens is not a great thing to do for very long.
Oh, so you guys cheated. You took you took capitals. That's cheating.
Two, come on, we can't use two faxes versus PL. My God,
It's cheating. It's cheating.
Yeah, I mean, Unspoken Alliance has a almost ridiculous amount of experience dealing with much larger groups and knowing how to fight. So it's really kind of nothing new on that front in terms of groups trying to come in and either blow up a structure or get a fight or just be annoying. It's par for the course.
I can imagine with the waves that you guys have been making in Tribute ever since that big vacuum was in there, that people have been kind of coming in wanting a piece, right? So there's this storyline that Tribute's this really fun place for, especially for veterans to do small gang, medium gang type of thing. So I'm sure you guys get a lot of unwanted visitors, not necessarily in the form of like the PLs of the world, but just with small groups that live close by. Is that something that you guys get a lot? Like, do you get like roaming gangs into your space?
Well,
Absolutely.
so do we want to like set the context? Because I know we were talking about Tribute in general and stuff. So do we want to give like some context for that first, and then kind of like go into that
Absolutely.
segment?
Go with that. Yes.
Do you want me to take it away, David?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. I mean, right now, Tribute is set up so you have Rote Kapelle runs a constellation over by the MTech O gate, so that's right next to Lowsec. And Tribute is a region that is 8 jumps from Zeta. Like, if you need a new ship, it's a 10-minute walk at most. So it's really easy for people to roam up to Tribute, and a lot of people tend to do so. And so Tribute's a pretty great place if, like you said, you're experienced and you want to kind of roam or come up or bring a small fleet. There's almost always a good fight to be had. And that's probably the biggest difference between Tribute and Vale. Right now, most of the content in Vale is around timers, which personally, that's like small fights over timers is my favorite form of content. But Tribute is really a lot of these kind of roaming groups coming through, and Unspoken, Trigger Happy, Rote Kapelle, we will all look for these groups and try and undock basically as fast as we can to try and fight them before they move on. The one thing that was key from your point earlier is that it tends to be experienced pilots who get the most out of this. Rote Kapelle, they describe themselves as aggressively mediocre, but they're good nano, they're good small gang pilots. Unspoken like to consider ourselves somewhat of the same, and Trigger Happy is no slouch either. They've got a lot of very good pilots. So if you want to bring, 5 new bros and Merlins, you're probably going to have a rough time. But for those mid-size or small gangs where you have people who generally know what you're doing, you're going to get a good fight, and it's going to be a tough fight.
That is really cool. Tribute is like my favorite little, just my favorite area. I don't want to make it seem like I'm poo-pooing you guys by saying little, but it's my favorite little area to keep an eye on, because there's always nonstop something that looks like it's fun that happened there. Like no matter what time of day, no matter what structures are going down, I keep an eye on the Tribute kill boards, and I see like, oh look, there's a skirmish over here. Like, oh look, there's a skirmish over there, and it doesn't ever seem to be like horribly lopsided. Right? So it's never like a 100-to-1 type engagement. It's always like a 60-40 or at worst like a 70-30 type thing.
Yeah, it's been a tremendously good content arena. I mean, I guess I'll just go into, Rote Kapelle and how we got into the area, if that's okay with you, Carneros.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess to give you a little background, Rote Kapelle, we're a pretty old alliance. I think we were founded in 2008. And, we've always been very small fleet, small gang, roaming focused. Traditionally, we lived out of um, Syndicate until about halfway through our history, and then we started being more nomadic and roaming around. We've had a couple of forays into SOV, most prominently down in the independent version of the QFC down in Quarius. And we ran something kind of experimentally there with a couple of other groups, like Brave Affirmative, that kind of thing, for a little while. And then spent a little bit more time in Lowsec. And then after the goon glassing of Tribute and all that, infrastructure in the area, that is a really well situated region. It's a gateway if anybody wants to go north from Jita. It's very close by. The jump ranges are incredibly good to the area, and it was entirely unoccupied. So we had a couple of dudes who were like, "Hey, we want to set some timers. We want to, take some SOV." And we had some discussions in leadership and said, let's make another go of it. We've spent a lot of time over the years experimenting with how small groups can hold and operate SOV in SOV independently. And, it's a really, we think we've landed on a good model for the area right now.
Yeah, it definitely does seem that way. And yeah, Rote is one of those kind of old storied names that you've seen floating around for quite a long time. I remember them from the Scrap Heap Challenge days when they were like a huge group back then. They lived a lot of the time. They lived in Syndicate. That's where I kind of always remember running into Rote dudes was in Syndicate.
Yeah, that period was defined by Cassius Longinus and his very regular, incredibly excellent fleets. Great FC. He's since moved on, and we've kind of become more nomadic since then. Though nowadays we go where the content.
And that's good, right? Because that's one of the play styles that people have been saying is lacking in EVE Online right now. Is the nomadic dudes not necessarily wanting to be part of a larger coalition or larger alliances? They just kind of go where the fights are. They're not necessarily tied down to the land, but they do have the land, right?
Yeah, I mean, statistically, this is the best year Rote Capella's ever had. So, people
Fantastic.
say that Eve is dead and small gang is dead and small scale is dead. I mean, to that I say, get in a fleet of 10, 15 guys, hammer out how to, come up with effective doctrines and practice, and you'll get content. You'll be able to go and get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mind if I pop in with a little overview of Unspoken then?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, let's get a little bit more info about the entire. Yeah.
Tell us about
Yeah.
the history of Unspoken, Murray.
Ah, I joined 6 months ago. I don't know anything. So from what I've picked up, Unspoken's about 3 years old, I believe. They started out in Great Wildlands, a region that, to the best of my knowledge, is dead and has been dead for a long time. Um, After that, they moved into Ethereum Reach, which is where they started to kind of become a little more known. They took part in the big war against XIX, the DRF, the DCU, and they ended up being kind of the frontline group for fighting in Ethereum Reach, taking out a bunch of DCU kind of smaller alliances and ending up fighting Prothean for a very long time there. Then they were just kind of living in ER for a while until they got evicted by the PanFam super block after those supers were called in due to some minor diplomatic misunderstandings, like blowing up a renter CTO and burning all their iHubs. After that, and this is about when I joined, we initially went and tried to take some Sob and Cash, which is a pretty cool region, before eventually kind of being pushed off again by PanFam and Fraternity kind of at the same time. And then Rote said, hey, we're having fun in Tribute. So we packed up the bus and moved over there, and we've been fighting in Tribute ever since. It's been a pretty good time.
That's
So
good. Yeah.
you already knew Rote Capelle before you moved to Tribute? You were friends with those guys?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can speak to this a little bit better. We've been operating. They were producing some great, like, medium-sized content over in the drone regions for a long time. There's a lot of really good FCs over in Unspoken, so we've known them for a while. There's some ex-Rote people there, and going over and participating that, we built a pretty strong relationship. And once they left that region and were looking for a new home, it seemed pretty natural. We're very complementary groups in a lot of ways.
Well, what are your relationships like with Trigger Happy?
We're
Because you're sort of
neighbors
your neighbors, but
insofar
not
as,
really friendly.
yeah, I mean, a lot of it is really predicated on the fact that we're in different time zones. So, like, even if either one of us really wanted to fight the other or work with the other, there isn't a whole lot of opportunity to do so. Like, I couldn't kill their Sav if I wanted to, and they couldn't they couldn't kill our staging fort if they wanted to in the current state of affairs. So there's not really a reason for us to fight, and generally speaking, we're not awake at the same time. So we end up fighting when we can or at very specific opportunities. But other than that, we actually don't interact a whole lot.
It's
I
mostly
like
skirmishing between our small, off hours guys. So that's what tends to happen. We're not, we don't hate them. We're not super cordial. We don't have a lot of concrete agreements. So we're just kind of like, we're both there together, doing our own thing, enjoying the content.
neighbors with benefits. Oh, it sounds like
Yes, there you go. We share a jump bridge, I think, for just making commute through the region work a little bit better.
All right. And are Rote Kapelle and Unspoken Alliance blue to each other?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are, if you look at our fleets on Zeke Hill, it is very rare for a fleet from one of us to not have at least a couple members of the other. But a lot of that is a factor if we're both pretty small. So if we want to do something like go up to Cobalt Edge, throw down with 40, 50 dudes, it's nice to be able to fleet up and get a little bit of a bigger block.
And do you guys use wormholes to travel around, or you just gate it? You just like hoof it through the gate?
Tribute's great. All the structure timers are like 8 to 10 jumps away at most in Vale. Cobalt Edge is literally 14 jumps from one of our staging forts. Like, it's easy.
It is, but I mean, Thera is the best thing that ever happened to the game, as far as I'm concerned, from a small gang roaming perspective. Everybody, make a Thera scanning alt. Man, who's that group that Eve Scout? Man, donate to them. They do God's work. But yeah, if we want to roam too, it's super easy. There's always a Thera holder everywhere from within, at most like 5 jumps away from you. If you want to go play, so even though we're in the north, a lot of days we'll hop in frigates and go play Escape from Delve, and that's pretty easy these days.
Someone asked me if they wanted to roam in a brave space the other day, and I realized it was 44 jumps and away, and that I was just too lazy to do that. I was like, but I can go 15 jumps and do the same. It's fantastic.
Yeah, Tribute is really nice. For the longest time, it's been one of the more sought after areas of space, right? So you've got Pure Blind right next to it. So if things go real bad, you always have like an NPC station that you can call home. It's really close to to Zeta, as you said, right? So like you just put up a beacon in MTACO and logistics, bam, done, easy peasy. And like you said, it's just all over the place that you can get to.
Sometimes I go on Dotlan and look at the people who have owned MO previously and just go, why are we here, man? This is too good for us in terms of, I mean, that's the thing too. It's like some nights it's like, why are we leaving our constellation? We are very roaming focused alliance. Like most of our content comes from outside of our region, but some nights it's just fleets, like, just coming through MO. You just try to interdict that and you can fight for hours and hours. And we're like at the right scale where it's not just like, if a really big block lived there, and decided they wanted to set up some huge gate camp on the in-gate from Tazy, that would be, hugely suppressing. But on our off hours we'll have like 5-10 guys sitting there and just random stuff, so if a fleet comes through going north, we can have really fun fights with it. So it's a very good area for us. We're super happy.
That's good, and hopefully you guys can stay there for the long haul. As you mentioned, like if you look at the alliances that have owned MTACO, it's kind of an all-star list. You have Morsis Mihi, which was at the time the biggest alliance in the game. Band of Brothers, who then kind of tried to push them out but failed in that time. And then the Northern Coalition, who then took it over eventually from Morsis Mihi. Then Goons took it for a while. Then NC took it back, and then Goons took it back. And now you guys have it.
Save the best for last, right?
Exactly. Nice. I like it.
One other thing that is really nice about the region in terms of fights is you can get a lot more creative with doctrines in those smaller fights. If you're talking 150-man hack fleets, your options are Munins or Eagles or you feed. Whereas when you're talking 15 to 20 character fleets, you can do a lot more interesting stuff, and there's a lot more to think of in terms of counters. Theory crafting is like my wheelhouse of where I shine as an FC. Everything else, a little mediocre probably. And so when we run into a problem like, hey, a group we're fighting is using these really expensive Lokis that are actually pretty hard to deal with on even numbers, I can sit down and futz through Pytha, and then we come out on the other side with sacrileges, and then we realize the sacrileges are both pretty fun and actually not that bad. And we're like the only alliance in the game that's currently using sacrileges as a doctrine in any form, because everyone else has no use for them.
Yeah, I think the sacrilege is used by you guys, and then people doing dark abyssal sites, and that's it. Like there's zero other overlap.
There's a lot more space, at small scale than most people think in terms of innovative fleet comps. We're using phantasms a lot recently, which have been just incredibly fun. And there's a lot of things that people don't traditionally think about there that you can use very, very effectively at different scales.
Have you guys dabbled in the Triglavian menace? Like, have you gone with the trig ships? I know a lot of smaller size groups really love the trig ships, uh, especially when
So
hunter larger things.
So I know Unspoken was one of the first groups to adopt the Lashak back in Ethereum Reach. They used it to very good effect there, although that was a little bit before my time. Um, in terms of small fleets, the Drekovac can be very strong in nullsec. The one thing with it is it's a little slow, and so while it has great tank and generally speaking, a decent Drekovac fleet is very hard to kill. What we've generally run into when we're fighting Drekovacs is it tends to be more of a stalemate rather than an actual kind of like we get dunked by Drekovacs, where like we can't kill them, but we have enough mobility around grid, we have enough range control that those Drekovacs can't kill us either, and it ends up being kind of a stalemate. So Drekovacs are definitely strong, but outside of that, there's not too many options. Iki Tursas are not good in a small fleet setting. I'll stand by that. And
Cool.
Vedmax
I know some
that.
people that are gonna to fight you on that.
Well, they're great for killing capitals, but in terms of an armor doctrine, with the Iki Tursa, you're required to put 2 tracking computers in the mids. Otherwise, you have no range. And so you can't really play with your mid slots or use utility mids to build yourself an advantage. And if you are going to win a fight with Iki Tursas, it's going to take you 25 minutes because the damage ramp up is very slow and it's very weak, particularly if you're shooting that long range ammo.
Yeah, I think when you bring Ickies, they're most effectively used in a situation where you're not expecting a response, where you have a big, scary Triglavian fleet. You go in there, you get a super tackled, you get a cap tackled, and you got like 30 Ickies on field, and maybe they don't have their main FCs on, maybe it's off hours, and they look at that and they're like, man, this is really spooky. People don't still have that much experience with them yet. I don't know what to bring to fight this. Like, this looks like a really expensive, awful fleet. Let's just leave it alone, man. Let's write off that super before whelping another 10-15 billion fleet into it. I love the Triglavian ships from a design perspective. They are amazing in terms of ships that are very, very powerful at small scale, but just like dramatically underperform as you scale up. Like, 100-man hurricane versus Dracovac fleet, which one is going to win every freaking time? Even though Dracovac is on paper a much more powerful ship.
Yeah. That's why I was saying like a lot of the groups, like 5 to 20 people, really have been liking these trig ships.
Oh yeah, and the Kikimora, man, I love that thing. I don't know if I'm still in the top 10 for them. It's such a good ship, and that it like serves every small ganger's like dream needs. It's fast, has a lot of projection, but it's also balanced by being really, really thin and really expensive. So, people feed a lot of expensive Kikis, so it's like got a good balance and performance ratio.
I could pick you guys' brains all day about theory crafting and fun stuff, but we do have to wrap up eventually. So
Oh yeah, there was part of the reason we wanted to come on is last Sunday there was a segment that you guys had on Tribute and Vale. We enjoyed fighting Vale, but we don't think that we were accurately characterized in what like Tribute is versus Vale. I think we're actually a lot more similar than the implication was, and that talked about us being kind of like blue empire builders, which I thought was kind of funny. You know, uh, it's not very often that we're called blobby either, but that, that is what it is. I feel like the fights between us have been actually very good in terms of number sized. In terms of numbers, and when you're fighting hard against people, which we like to, it's always tough to find the right size in terms of like, are they going to bat phone? Are we going to bat phone? How important is this objective to us versus how is it important to them? That kind of thing. So I can see where that comes from. But in terms of tribute culture, we're really not doing the whole empire building thing. We like to live off the land, as we put it, and take advantage of our, little area and pockets we're in to, make some misc while we're there in our downtime. But we kind of build the sandcastle from the perspective of like, this is a paintball arena that if somebody big comes in, we will like have a fighting retreat through, and create, interesting territory for that side of things versus us being like, blue empire coalition building. We're very, very independent in that regard. And the blues that we do have are very complementary in terms of, time zone specialization and that kind of thing. Unspoken tends to be a little bit earlier in the day than us. We are mostly late West Coast USTZ, and we're actually, part of Snuff. We're getting some of our AUTZ component back, so we're really starting to bulk up in that regard, which is good because it like lets us fight the Chinese groups that are in the north. But I'm getting a little off topic. But yeah, it's kind of like we see the tribute area as a platform for developing content versus like you know throwing down and like building like a little local coalition or regional power block or something like that.
Okay, let's start to wind down. And we've got a tradition we do at the end of our show, which is we go around the room and tell them things you might not know about EVE Online. I'll go first. I've got one related to upwell structures, and this is aimed at people who have maybe never set up a structure before. You've used them, you've tethered on them, you've docked in them, but you've never set one up yourself, and the time will come when you go to put one on. So I'm going to give you some advice, two pieces of advice here on this. One of those is you're going to need, at one point, it's going to ask you for a structure profile. Now, if you can set up the profile before you even undock and before you go out there to go drop your structure in space, and that's a good idea because you don't want to be sitting out in space trying to online a structure, probably in an industrial ship, maybe at risk of being shot by someone. And sit there and try to figure out a new and complex part of the Eve interface. So, I'm suggesting you make it in space, make it in station first, and then you can just apply it to the structure as you're onlining it. And then two is if one of the big mistakes people make is they go set it up and point it in the wrong direction. And that has a huge impact on the quality of life of all the users of the station. So I recommend deciding where you want to put it, make a bookmark, decide what direction you want it to point, and then go set it up once on the Singularity test server to get a feeling of how it works and see how it goes. Then go and set it up on Tranquility. So you can be a little bit more smooth and answer all the questions and all that.
Yeah, that is a big thing. Like we've even seen the Imperium take down a Keepstar so they could have it aligned the correct way. So that's a big deal, right? No one, it might seem OCD to you, but like when you undock and you have to then turn 40 degrees to go to the gate or to your jump bridge, and it's really annoying every single time. My trick is something that I didn't know people didn't know, actually. I was watching a Twitch streamer and a YouTube guy who's actually super great if you're interested in Abyssal sites. He does Abyssal PvP Proving Grounds. His name is Torvald Uruz, Torvald. You'll see him on Twitch. I know he does, he's doing YouTube content more, which is where I ran into him. But if you want to, and this is probably only really useful if you're dealing with PvE rather than PvP. But if you want to lock everything quickly in an area, you can control and then left click, and then it'll let you draw a box. And then when you let go, everything within that box will be targeted. Obviously, by the way targeting works, you'll lock the bigger things first, and so the frigates won't get locked. But if you're in a rush and you want to lock everything, that's a good way to do it. If you're using it in PvP, the best use case is for drones. So instead of having to swap out to a drones only overview, you just zoom in on your ship, control click, make a box around your ship. It'll lock all the drones attacking you, right? So if you're fighting like an Ishkar, an Ishtar, or a healer or anything like that, and you want to quickly lock onto those drones, that's the best way to do it.
Nice. Maestro, could you put up the fit graphics there for David? And David, go ahead and tell the audience your item there.
Is the image up?
It will be in a second. So assume he's got it up by the time you talk.
Alrighty. So, I mean, another thing about Rote, we tend to have what we like to call a fitting culture, where we spend a lot of time, analyzing our fits, our doctrines, that kind of thing in advance, like a lot of time, and aggressively, going over them and arguing about, how to really fine tune them. And obviously, we like to encourage people to go out there and get their roam on. And this is a concept I've been working with a lot lately. It's an Osprey Navy issue, which is really one of the best, most affordable frigates, or sorry, cruisers in the game. I call it a frigate. You'll see why in a second. But this is a great small gang roaming concept. It's very easy to use for newer players, so this is a very accessible fit. There are not a lot of ways to screw it up in terms of piloting. Um, and it's interesting in that it doesn't do a ton of damage. Decent, but nothing crazy. And it has a lot of projection. It's very, very fast. And this is a great ship for new players to bring out on roams. You do need good power grid skills, but an implant or two, very cheap one, will fix that. And that's the only real requirement aside from the other Tech 2 stuff. It's a good ship to use, and it illustrates something that I wanted to point to. Now you'll notice this has 3 nanofiber or 2 nanofiber internal structures and a medium polycarb. Why does it have that? It seems a waste to use 3 fitting slots on agility and speed mods. But a very interesting and underrated thing for roaming ships is that, actually, for that picture, it's a better example, is that if the prop mod is off, this ship has a sub 3-second warp and align time, which means that from a complete standstill, if you select something to warp off to, this will leave grid in 3 seconds. And there is almost nothing in the game aside from instacamps that will be able to catch that. So this is a very adaptable ship in terms of if you're landing on grid, you screw up range or something like that, you can leave very, very quickly. And the flexibility in the mids, you can sub that missile guidance computer out for any other kind of E-war. A point, a target painter, whatever your fleet needs. It's very, very flexible. And with the range, you can stay at distance, be safe, and project, a really solid amount of damage. So this is a great fit for new players to take. And pointing to that agility thing, a lot of times, look at your ship, see if you can get past another second or two of warp speed breakpoint with another speed or agility mod. It makes a huge impact on survivability, especially if you're fighting up in difficult engagements.
But won't you warp out quickly and leave your Logi in the dust?
Logi? What's that?
Okay, never mind.
Logistics in a nano gang are, generally speaking, rare. They'll take care of themselves.
And they're even more rare after the first time you warp out.
I love this fit though, and it's so cheap. It's 100 mil. Like there's almost nothing else that you can get a stat line this. It's basically, it warps in at 5 AU a second as fast as a frigate. It's basically just a really, really, really big, really tough assault frigate with like 70 km range in that setup.
Nice. Yeah, if you're listening to the podcast and you can't see what we have on screen, he's put up a fit for an Osprey Navy issue that relies on 3 rapid light missile launcher 2s for most of its damage dealing. Also has a couple of neutralizers for cap warfare. It's got a micro warp drive, a shield tank, a missile guidance computer, and then the lows and rigs are both set up for maneuverability, like nanofibers and polycarbon engine housing, and then also ballistic control, for a little bit more punch with your missiles. And it's beautiful. Looks like fun.
One thing I will say about that fit, which is good to note for other fits of nano variety, the small and medium newt combo does a very good job of helping screen off assault frigates that want to try and catch you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I spent a long time thinking about what to do with the last rig slot. And, a medium ANSI lets you fit a medium neutralizer. So you apply that first. You can absolutely cap flatten a frigate that's on top of you. And then you start cycling the small newt offset to that. You wait a couple of seconds after you cycle your medium, you start the small. Small newt doesn't newt as much, but it will chew through the little bit of regen they have. It's what's left over and keep them entirely capped out and unable to do anything.
Nice. Oh, thanks, Ron. That would be great. Ron's volunteering to put the fit in Discord.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, yeah, we have a Discord community that you can participate and talk to people. Now, Elise, do we have a little breaking news about a Ragnarok and a skyscraper?
Yeah, actually, as we were going live this morning, Fraternity managed to snap a test Ragnarok, and it is in a kind of a fun way. So it's not like they're not at war anymore. So it's not like of strategic significance, right? But it is kind of fun. So Fraternity went out, not resting on their laurels, right? They went out over to their friend Tappy Space in Esoteria in a bunch of bombers, like 50 or 60 bombers. And their goal was just to catch some oracles mining and harass them and then see what would come up of it. So they tackled the oracles, and then Test sends in a reinforcement fleet of supers, shoo those bombers away and to save their oracles. And then Fraternity go, aha, but the other shoe will drop now. And they dropped in about 30 suicide dreads. And because one eager test pilot decided to, with the super fleet, took his rag, his Tech 2 Fit Ragnarok, just because it's fun, might as well. And so Fraternity saw this and say, hey, we'll go after this rag. And they managed to pop the rag, and they lost, I think, 15 of their 30 dreads. So they got half of them out. So Test managed to kill 15 dreads, and then Fraternity got the prize of their Ragnarok down. So I'm sure there's one happy rag seller in Esoteria right now, one sad rag pilot, and then a whole bunch of really happy people that got to drop on stuff.
Nice. All right. Anything else before we close up? All right. Go ahead.
Just to throw in my did you know tip, which will be useful in MTECO when you run into the large warp bubble that Rote keeps anchored on the gate. You can, so if you're on grid with an anchorable bubble or a dictor bubble or whatever, and you're trying to warp to something that's on the other side of that bubble, if the spot you're warping to is on grid, you will not be able to warp to it. But if you're warping to, say, a celestial or something that's off grid on the other side of the bubble, it will let you go through. So something to be conscious of before you accidentally stop moving because you tried to warp through a bubble and David Zeta catches you.
Fantastic. All right. So thank you for joining us today for another conversation about spaceships. You're also welcome to enjoy our Today in EVE Online daily show at 1500 UTC, Monday through Friday. That's hosted by Matterall. Please watch more of our videos on youtube.com/talkinginstations. Please join the conversation on Talking in Stations Discord, as we mentioned. There should be a link somewhere nearby or in the talkingstations.com website. Big thanks to our supporters on Patreon, YouTube, and Twitch TV who make this happen. That's all for this episode. Fly well.